Hi, welcome back to another episode of Wu Says. This is where we get real about US, China, everywhere and everything in between. It's two superpowers, one global story. I'm Melisa Idris, and joining me today is Professor Thye, who has been studying US-China relations long before tariffs became headline news. So today we're going to start, Prof. Wu, we're going to start with the latest news. Trump's latest trade twist, of course. The US has decided, finally has announced that they're lowering their tariffs to Malaysia specifically from 25% to 19% starting August 1st. And I'm curious to know your read on the situation. How do you think this has played out in terms of the Malaysia-US negotiations over the tariffs?
I think the Malaysia in the US negotiations were pretty much predicted by what Prabowo received in his negotiations with the US. That set a metric of 19%. And then what we see is 19% from Malaysia, Philippines, Thailand, Cambodia, and for countries that are explicitly more in the China camp, they got 40%. That's a warning to us. And this particular bifurcation of 19% for Malaysia, Thailand, Philippines versus 40% for Myanmar and Laos is a very clear introduction of US national security concerns into the economic sphere. These are allies of China. And so when you're allies of China, you get higher tariff. This is a historic turning point for the world because it means the end of the WTO system as we know it. The WTO system of free trade among members of the organization. Now there's no undifferentiated free trade anymore. If you have China, 40%. If you are neutral, or hopefully more part of the US, then you get 19%. And if you are like Singapore, which has been most pro-US in its support, 10%.
Wow. So talk to me about the significance of that. It feels like this is a significant point, like a pivotal point in the global economy, in the way the global economy has functioned over the past few decades. Why do you say it's the end of free trade? How do we navigate this turning point in the global economy?
Well, I think we have to think about the time when the world took another turning point, which was towards the globalization that is ending. If you think about the globalization that really started, it started with the disintegration of communism. Basically, the disintegration of the communist economic system of central planning. That was an important turning point which contains lessons about economic reforms that are necessary to deal with the new world. Just like Malaysia will now faces a new set of opportunities and challenges. So we will have to undertake adjustments. Adjustments in the face of different circumstances. You can call that reform, you can call that realism, but I think past adjustments by different countries in history would be useful guide on how Malaysia should make its adjustments.
Right. Yeah. And you have had a front row seat to some of the most consequential reform episodes in the past few decades, in the 90s. Talk to me a little bit about that, specifically in Russia and in Poland.
Well, a reform can take place under two circumstances. One is the domestic situation is so dire that you see no choice but to make big changes. So, because reforms by their nature are revolution against yourself. Why? Think of the following. If a leader says, from now onwards, we are going to turn 180 degrees from what I was doing in the past. If the world outside has changed, you got a very good excuse because the world has changed and so I'm turning 180 degrees because this is the new thing. But what if the world has not changed? If the world has not changed and you say, let us turn 180 degrees, you are admitting that you have made mistakes in the past. In other words, you recognize your mistake and so now that's why you're turning. And if you was responsible for the screw up in the first place, why are you still in charge? So most reforms are hard to undertake by existing governments in a world that has not changed because that is a confession of I really messed up big in the past and now I'm trying to dig myself out of the hole that I created for myself.
Okay.
So reforms in general are hard to take except for when there are changes in government. Then you can blame everything on the previous person and you said, that's why you voted him out, didn't you? You all voted him out and so I'm here. This is exactly what happened in Poland. In the case of Poland, there have been stagnation for 20 years before 1989. Which stagnation? Accompanied by growing food shortages.
Okay.
And at the same time, they could see the growing prosperity in Western Europe. So when Gorbachev came to power in 1985, the Russian economy has been contracting for the last 2 years.
Okay.
So that's why Gorbachev's back was, he had no choice. He knows that more of the same could not go. So he has to undertake reform under the name of perestroika and then glasnost. But the important thing is reforms are usually made when it's a new group of people who comes in. In the case of Gorbachev, he had just succeeded Andropov, who died. And so he was a new figure, but the problem was he was picked by the figure who died. So because he was a successor, he was part of the team.
He had all this legacy and the baggage they had to carry.
Exactly. Yes. So here are two types of reforms. The reforms by people who were chosen by their predecessors, and reforms in countries where they got into power because election threw up the previous guy. So the previous guy did not choose you. And the third type of reform was just a social revolution, such that it was not the reforms that brought you in. You came riding on the back of a tank, on the top of a tank. So there are three types of situations in which reforms have taken place. Well, in the case of Malaysia, clearly we had elections and we had new people. But let's look back at Poland, where the reforms, they came in and they came in by election. But the kind of reforms, really, the right reforms, has to do with speed and direction. In other words, do I just speed up whatever the previous guy was doing, or do I take a different direction? And taking a different direction, what speed should I go at? All of this depends on what are the circumstances you find yourselves in.
Okay.
Let's talk about Poland. In this case, a new government got elected, a non-communist government. And they inherited a bureaucracy that was 100% selected to serve the communist power structure. That is the domestic situation. They are unable to know the loyalty of the instruments in which they inherit. As opposed to Gorbachev. Gorbachev inherited, but it was left behind by the person who chose him. So he's got the loyalty of the bureaucracy. He came from the insider. He was a new face of the old gang.
Oh, the gang.
You see, that's the new face of the old gang versus new faces of a new gang.
That's a good position to be in, Gorbachev.
Gorbachev had. So what you could do was very different because Gorbachev could still command the bureaucracy to do things because they have used to following the orders of his group. They were all promoted by his group. Whereas the new people that came in Poland is not sure of internal sabotage by the bureaucracy, for one thing. The more important thing that the Poles realized is they want to change it in a direction that is different from before. And the last time, when someone tried to do that in Hungary in 1956, the Russians invaded and restored the old way.
Right.
And in 1968, when Czechoslovakia tried to change things, the Russians invaded and restored it. So these people see themselves as possibly having a short lifespan. And if you think you have a short lifespan, then you want to make changes that are so big so that whoever come back will find it really hard to reverse. So you got to move quickly.
Speed.
Speed and big and comprehensive. You want large-scale changes on in as speedy a manner as possible. And it's also justified by that the situation is dire, in that there's food shortage.
Right.
So what did they do? They were very lucky that they had someone called Balcerowicz, a professor at Warsaw School of Economics, who had spent most of his professional career dreaming about, if I could end central planning, how would I do it? So here he was operating the middle of a centrally planned economy, and he has this dream thinking about how would I change it if given the chance.
Wow.
So he was the man with a plan. So even though he was not a card-carrying member of the party that came in, but he's the guy who actually has a coherent plan of what to do.
Wow.
So they selected him and said, go and make us like West Germany. Because you must understand, for reforms, you got to have a vision of the end goal. It cannot be let's try this and let's try that. The end goal is we want to be at this point and we are going to work backwards from the end goal to where we are.
Okay.
Okay. So from the end goal to where we are, what do we need?
Okay, so the end goal, the vision for Poland was to move away from central planning.
Whatever they were, from to West Germany.
Which was a capitalist society.
Capitalist market economy that everybody who had visited East Berlin and West Berlin could tell the big difference.
Understood.
That was just you could call that a blinding insight. When you saw it was such a blinding thing that you understood, that is where the direction is. So how do you move from one to the other? The first thing is, under central planning, you had got the prices set by the bureaucracy, the prices of the output, the prices of the input. So the firms were nothing like, they don't need to be entrepreneurial because they were told how many to produce at what price and then what inputs to buy at what price. So their profits were already preset for them. So and there was no entrepreneurship. And so what they did, so that was the first thing. The second thing was the country doesn't believe in free trade. It believes that we should try to produce everything domestically if we can. If we cannot make it, then we will have to import it. So import was the last resort. It was not normal trading. So that's the second part. And the third part had to do with everything was government-owned, including the restaurants. Incredible. Small restaurants are state-owned. And all the stores are state-owned. So you compare that to Germany, you straight away know you have to have free moving prices to restore entrepreneurship. That means you got to legalize the private sector.
Wow.
Because under communism, the private sector was illegal.
Yes.
So the direction was to become like Germany. We got to free up prices. We got to have private enterprises. And we got to greatly reduce the state enterprises. And the third one is we got to integrate into the world.
This is really major reforms. This is the dismantling of the entire power structure to something new. You weren't kidding when you talked about the how big the scale of the reforms were.
Yes, and I think some of the reforms that we could do in Malaysia, some of the reforms were to big scale and ambitious, and some we can tweak on the margin because we are doing pretty well. We are just trying to do better. That's all. So in this case, now Poland knows what the end goal is. Similarly, so did China in 1978. China also, when Deng Xiaoping visited Japan and Singapore, he was just astounded. You know, how could they now be so far ahead of us? So he knows the 4 changes that I talk about. Price liberalization, you need to have internationalization, you've got to have macroeconomic stability, and you got to reduce the state sector. All of this is known. But the question is, how quickly should we do it? And how quickly you should do it depends on the capacity of the civil service, whether they will listen to you, and what you think is likely to be the world trend. Like, for example, if you think Russia might invade you, then you definitely want to move quickly. But if Russia is not going to invade you, and if you are able to get the bureaucracy to do what you want to do, then you can have a more, or what you call, planned out process of what to do. But if you are not, you know the bureaucracy cannot be trusted, and Russia could be invaded, then let's do it really quickly, even though we haven't finished drawing up the 100% plan. So Poland.
Shock therapy for Poland.
That was what it was described as. Big bang, shock therapy. Basically, it is quick changes on a broad front. That is what it was. And there are some, looking back at China, what it really shows is there are some reforms that must be done very quickly and some reforms that can be done very slowly.
I think this is fascinating because the relevance of kind of historical events we can take lessons from, because we're seeing similar pivotal points happening today in the global economy. So I want to come back to this conversation and talk a little bit about Poland's success story and what happened with Russia, and also looking at China. So let's come back and talk a little bit more about how these really momentous reform episodes have shaped the world today. We'll be back with another episode of Wu Says shortly in the next week. So make sure you come back for more on this topic. I'm Melisa Idris, with me, Prof. Wu Wing Thye, talking about everything and everywhere between China and the US. We'll be back soon. See you.